Our winter kale is ready to be planted out now. This is part 4 of the grow along, and it's to grow kale over winter. And if you haven't managed to join in so far, if you can manage to pick up some plants somewhere, then that would be great. If not, sadly, it is probably a bit too late to actually start some seeds. So last time we looked at these, we planted them up from this size pot into the larger size pots, and then a few of them were left in this size because they hadn't put on enough roots yet. And today we're going to look at popping these into the bed in the polytunnel. So they are going to have the protection of the polytunnel for myself. And then a few of them I will be allowing to grow on and become considerably larger before I look at planting them outside. Depending where you are and how quick the variety grows, then we may not actually be looking at planting any outside until possibly February. So don't worry if you have got some started and they sit in their pots for a while. Brassicas are usually quite happy, and they'll happily sit within a cold frame, a polytunnel or a greenhouse and wait for be planted, and then we'll be able to get an early crop out of them still, because they'll be quite mature plants by the time we do plant them. The roots are just starting to show through the bottom on these, but they will be absolutely fine and happy in these for another few weeks. If I was going to be overwintering them under cover, then I would actually be looking at potting them on again, just to make sure that they've got plenty of room to grow. But you don't need to consider actually feeding them over the winter period, because their growth won't be enough. We'll be looking at starting to feed anything in pots again from mid-February. But in the meantime, all the nutrients in the soil will support their very slow growth at this time of the year. This is the bed that these kale plants are going to go in. Along with the kale, we've also got some endive, and then we've got some cauliflower going down there, and at the back you can see there's some hardneck garlic going in. This is the bed that we had the tomatoes in over summer. So I'm trying to plant these to take into consideration of where the tomatoes are going to be planted. These plants may not have completely finished, particularly the cauliflower, by the time our tomatoes are ready to come in here. So it's really about thinking about the spacings and how we can then still plant the smaller tomato plants and any pepper plants that I want to plant in here. Each of these kale plants are being spaced at around 12 inches each, and I've got 8 plants going into this bed, including this lovely little variegated variety. I didn't sow any variegated, it's just a bit of a throwback, so I'm going to pop that one in because that'll be pretty. If you are thinking of actually picking them as smaller leaves rather than allowing them to completely mature, then you could put them around 8 inches apart instead, or even 6 inches, and continue to pick them as they're smaller. To prepare this bed ready for planting, we have cut the tomatoes right down to the bottom, but we've left the roots in. If there are any roots that are going to be in our way, then we can just remove them as we come across them, but otherwise they'll rot down within the ground and not cause any further issues. And this is something that I do with pretty much all the plants that I remove. And then I've emptied any of the pots that I've been growing peppers in, so there'll be the roots and the spent compost from that in there, and we've topped it with a layer of the bio bloom as well. Where the tomatoes have also been in this bed before, we had to stop watering the bed to allow those tomatoes to be forced into a stress period in order to ripen. So the bed has been very, very well watered to make sure that there are no dry patches within the soil. We have also cleaned the polytunnel on the inside, and we'll be cleaning the polytunnel on the outside. We want to make sure that these plants are going to get as much light as possible going into the winter months, because although it is dull, we still want to use that light as best we can and utilize it. The first thing we want to do is dig a hole around the same size as the pot. If, however, your plants are looking quite leggy, then I would plant them in a little bit deeper. We are going to come across some of the roots in here, so we'll just work around them. And then we're going to turn the kale upside down, supporting the plant, and you can see the roots are doing well there, and just lower that into the hole. Brassicas want to be really well firmed. They don't like to rock. That's what can cause them to run to seed really quickly. So we are going to make sure these are sturdy in each of their spaces. There we go, that's the first one planted. So if you've got any that are a little bit leggy, like this one, we want to plant it right to the base of where the plant's leaves are coming from. So get them in a little bit deeper. Any pockets of drier compost that you do find, then make sure you give it a good water. There is always the chance of having some drier pockets even when you have watered it really well. That's all of our kale plants popped in now, and I popped that one at the back there a little bit further back because it was annoying me it wasn't in line. Bit of a perfectionist. Now I'm just going to gently water these guys in, but make sure this bed is really quite well watered. We're not likely to water it again for another 4, possibly even 6 weeks at this time of year. What I'll do is poke my finger into the soil, and if it's feeling wet, then I'll leave it. If it's feeling dry, then I will give them a bit more water and give them a good dose of water at each period rather than just a little amount of water to make sure their roots are going down rather than just sitting in the root ball that they're currently in. Brassicas are actually really quite hardy, so one thing that we don't need to worry about is using a heater or anything with these guys. They should be absolutely fine down to at least minus 10, 12, maybe even more. So for most of us in the UK, it's temperatures that we're unlikely to get to. If we do, then it's usually just for an hour or two during a really cold night. And at that point, we can just pop a fleece cover over them. You may also notice that there's quite a gap now between each of these plants. So what I'll be doing along this sort of area here is actually planting some of my winter lettuces in there, just so we can use that space and they'll all grow slowly together. The remainder of these plants that we haven't actually popped into the beds, I'm now going to allow to grow on, and they'll get a little bit more roots before they actually are potted on into larger pots. And then they're going to end up in beds outside. So I will look at those with you, but just make sure that you keep an eye on the bottom of the pots and check for how many roots are in there, or tip them upside down and have a look at the roots. If they've still got plenty of space for more roots, then we don't need to worry about potting them up yet. But if they are getting quite a lot of roots, then it would be beneficial for them to be potted on. And then we can get those planted outside as and when we are ready. And as I said, that may not actually be till February. It's really going to depend on how the winter goes and whether or not you've got an area that's available and ready to be netted as well. The net isn't actually to keep these warm in any way, or really any removal of pests at this time of the year, because all the pests that we deal with over the summer aren't really an issue at this time of the year for the brassicas. It's more just to give them a microclimate that's going to be a bit kinder to them. So we don't want them to be battered a lot by wind or rain, and it will just give them that little bit of a breathing space in order to be in a sheltered position that they wouldn't be otherwise. And you may find in your garden that actually your garden is sheltered enough and that you wouldn't need that, but I would definitely have it in mine. Or if you're up north, then you may find that you can't grow them without that added protection of a net.